Well then, campers, it is a wonderful Wednesday to you all. It's Andy here for another Ask Andy Anything. My word, have I got a well-dressed and finely groomed gentleman to my right. I've got Nic Cuni here, who is very much one of the people that not only does he champion regional Victoria tremendously well, he's one of the guys around Geelong that you do perhaps need to know. Nic, how are you, my man? Looking quite relaxed there with your glass of vino in hand.
Well, it is 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night. Doing nicely here in regional Victoria, mate. Nice and relaxing.
Very good, mate. What have you got in that glass, please? What have we got?
Well, it's actually a nice little French rosé, actually, which is nice and refreshing. What have you got?
Me, cup of tea, mate. Mate, the British Empire was built on cups of tea, man.
I'll be having a cup of tea in about 35 minutes, I reckon.
Right, we can't beat a good brew. Gang, I hope you're going well. I hope you had yourselves a good start to this first half of the week. As always, we want to know how you are going out of 10. Make sure that you let us know in the comment section below. Post your scores on the door so that we can see how you are all going. If you've got any success stories, please share them as well. And as always, if you've got any questions to ask Nic or I, please feel free to pop them in the comments as well, and we'll get to them as and when. Now, I've got Nic on the show because we were having a real good chinwag a few days ago with regards to how unbelievably strong the shift is happening between going from metro to regional. So I thought it would be a really good time to have a great conversation with a very educated lad in the regional space, particularly around Geelong area, but all over regional Victoria. Nic's been an absolute star of the show down there in a number of ways. Mate, before we crack on, firstly, I want to know how you are out of 10. And then if you could give everybody a little bit of an MO, just so that everybody knows who you are before we rock and roll.
Yeah, sure. Out of 10, I'm probably sitting at about I'll probably say I'm about an 8.5 at the moment. Things are pretty good. The only thing I'm not doing, I've probably been a little bit lazy on the old exercise in the last few weeks. So I've been homeschooling and then focusing on my kids just going into the first couple of weeks of school holidays. So it's been a bit full on. But aside from that, mate, can't really complain. It's being able to go out and enjoy the good things that we've got out here in regional Victoria has been great. We haven't been locked down, unfortunately, like all of our friends in Melbourne, which is I couldn't imagine. We had to deal with it for a little while here, but not to the extent that Melbourne people have. So I feel really bad for a lot of them, a lot of family and friends out there and everyone else. And as a intro, I guess, I've been in real estate. I think this is nearly getting up to my 18th year in property and real estate. And, I had my own business for a while. I've worked for a couple of, major corporate businesses in the city. And now I've taken a different turn. I've really downscaled what I've been doing over the past few years to really focus on doing some projects in regional Victoria, or most importantly Geelong, and just focusing on some project marketing and a couple of other little commercial aspects of that spark my interest as I go along. So it's been a good journey, but I'm really enjoying what I'm doing at the moment.
Hey, what made you make this decision? Because where are you from originally?
I'm from Melbourne, so I was born and bred in Yarraville, so near Footscray, and then just sort of hung around the inner west of Melbourne for quite some time. Moved across the bridge for a little while to Prahran, but then I've been in Geelong for the past 8 years.
What made you go down to Geelong?
No, it was bizarre. I had a barbecue with some really good friends that lived in Newtown, and on the way home I saw this massive, beautiful Edwardian home for sale, and went to the open for inspection and did exactly what we tell most real estate agents tell their clients not to do, and bought it on the Appy Open, actually. Quite funny, and paid the asking price, which was silly.
Mate, I always say that, right? When the shoe's on the other foot, we are like the worst. We're the easiest people to sell to. and the biggest pains in the arse to actually have sell their property, right? We're a nightmare sometimes. Mate, thanks.
It just felt right, mate. It just felt right. As soon as we walked in, we said, "This is amazing." On the drive home, we said, "Jesus, I think we're moving to Geelong." And haven't looked back. Absolutely love it. It's amazing here.
That is quality. So, mate, tell me, I mean, having spent plenty of time in both towns, tell me, what are the inherent differences between Melbourne and Geelong from a lifestyle, from a living point of view?
Yeah, look, I think the fundamental difference, obviously, is the density of people in the area. It's obviously Geelong's got a lot less people, and that's one thing. It's sort of a little bit freer to get around, less traffic. In the suburb that I live in, I'm 3 minutes from the CBD of Geelong, which isn't a long way away. If you put that into Melbourne perspective, you're that Richmond East Melbourne sort of precinct, which is unattainable for the masses of Melburnians. So, to get in at this level into a suburb as close to the city as possible, it's great. The other thing is, you're emerging. There's a lot of new restaurants, bars, sort of precincts opening up in Geelong. There's something really exciting. There's a laneway operation going on at the moment, which is very similar to what happened in Melbourne, with, AC/DC lane, hardware lane and all that sort of stuff. So they're bringing alive, from a safety perspective, sort of lighting up these little back streets, but then putting in some ripping bars and restaurants and cafes. That's sort of bringing the city alive, which is, accessible to a lot of people. And then you're 20 minutes away from Torquay, 20 minutes away from Barwon Heads, and, it's no longer, packing your bags and having to go there, for a week. You can sort of head up there for a few hours if you wish.
Nice, man. It does, for a lot of people, and for a lot of people that have moved from overseas, Geelong really does sound like the other side of the world in some respects, right? And for some reason, it just does. Like me being Johnny Foreigner, it does sound like a hell of a long way away. But realistically speaking, man, when you think about the volume of infrastructure that's going in there, like you said, it's not just some sort of second cousin, one of those odd ones that you kind of see at a Christmas party and kind of try and avoid the rest of the year. Like it's a proper town with a proper heartbeat, right?
It certainly is. It's got its own heartbeat. It's got its own personality. I referred to it as a sister city today to a couple of buyers that were inquiring from Melbourne. It's no longer that regional town or Sleepy Hollows or whatever people used to call it. It's got its own heartbeat, like you say. You only have to look at NDIS, WorkSafe, TAC, Cotton On. That's thousands of people that are getting employed now. And this is white collar, office workers and the likes that are moving into this space. I was having a conversation with a couple of people and they're business owners in Geelong, and their most recent employees are actually relocating from Melbourne to Geelong. Which was funny because I was actually talking about you, and I said I'm going to do this tonight, and I can't go out to any bars tonight because I've got to do this podcast with my old mate Andy.
Sorry, mate. I've locked you in. I'm making you feel our pain for any.
No, but it was funny because the whole conversation came up, and I was talking about the amount of inquiry that I'm getting at the moment for the project that I'm selling in Geelong, and the conversation of, I've sort of coined a phrase within my crew that it's not a sea change or a tree change. It's more of it's a city swapper. And that city swapper buyer is someone that looking for somewhere that they can work, they can live, they can play, they can build a family, they can grow, enjoy, become part of a community, and live a very similar lifestyle to what they were in Melbourne. And this is certainly the place to do it. Unlike a lot of other regional towns in Australia, or Victoria for that matter, you don't have that same sort of access to, the coastline and some, larger organisations that really can work and earn a very, very good living.
And it's safe to say, because pretty much this is the same as almost any other town in the world, right? But your money travels further as well, like tremendous.
100%, 100%. I mean, hence why you go to an open for inspection. You know, for a guy from Melbourne goes to an open and then, you know, buys it without really questioning it, because you have a preconception in your head of what something's worth, and you look at a you know, beautiful Edwardian home and you think, God, in Melbourne that would be worth X amount. In Geelong it's worth this. So it's a no-brainer, and hence why, you know, slowly the prices have gone up and up and up in Geelong, because there's more people moving from out of town and seeing value in the suburb, being able to live so close to the city. And then the other thing is, I mean, I used to commute to Melbourne every single day, and it would be you know, as the bird flies, it's about a 60-minute trip, but in reality, with traffic, it's an hour and 20, hour and 30, sometimes even longer. You know, the trip from one end of Collins Street down to the other end of Collins Street in Melbourne's about an hour. So it was always a bit of a tough challenge. But then if you look at coming from the other side of town on the Monash, you could spend an hour and only be 10 k's away. So to travel that far, or even just to catch the V-line train, which is 60 minutes, it makes perfect sense. You know, you're going to travel the same amount of time, even though the distance is a lot further. It's you know, you can get a much better lifestyle out of you. That's for sure.
Look, me and the Monash aren't exactly best mates. Let's put it that way. Being a southeastern Melbourne lad myself, in where I am, if we're not out of our postcode by 5:30 a.m., it can take almost an hour just to get out of our own postcode. That's how insane it's getting now. That's how insane it's getting now. Me and my wife are actually thinking.
No, we're talking about.
Hey.
Sorry, go. We had a bit of crossover.
What did you say?
Keep going.
What did you say?
I was just going to say, you're getting out of a postcode in an hour. We're getting from Geelong to Melbourne.
Exactly. Me and my wife, we were jokingly, but kind of half not jokingly, sort of said, "Hey, look, would you go interstate?" And we're like, maybe, like, because it's just getting too hectic down here. Anyway, mate, let's talk about some numbers. Let's get a little bit geeky for a little bit, because we were chatting about the various numbers that you recently sort of compiled together. And you were doing lots of comparisons and stuff, because you've got, like I said, you're working on a decent project at the minute, so it's all sort of relevant for yourself. Give us the comparable numbers that you were going through.
Yeah, so the numbers that we had, you know, we drew some numbers from the Forecast ID. We had some numbers from Urbis. We had some numbers from District Data. We had some, you know, some numbers from CoreLogic as well. And, you know, the vacancy rate, 2.2 in Geelong, 2.2%, which is, you know, amazing, compared to that 5.7, I think it was in Melbourne. So that's number one. The population growth over the next 17 years in Geelong at 49%, which is a massive amount of people. You know, imagine putting 49% more people into Melbourne, you wouldn't be able to breathe.
Yeah.
You know, so there'd be more masks and gloves and everything going on at the moment. So that's a huge factor. Even the amount of construction going on compared to the amount of people coming in, there's going to be a massive shortfall. So supply and demand is going to be a big issue over the next, you know, 10 to 15 years. The rental yields are stronger out this way as well. I think one bedrooms are sitting at around 5.25%. So that's another good stat. And then just from an REA perspective and Domain, they're sort of throwing a few numbers across the table that over the last sort of 3 to 6 months, the inquiries doubled.
Wow.
And we're not talking doubled as in from 350 to 700. We're talking like 80,000 to 160,000. That's huge numbers.
No, they are big numbers. Massive key indicators, right? They're obviously still there's still the majority of money heading to Melbourne, but the smart money very much is heading out that way. And I think it's sort of even for the city slickers and whatnot in Melbourne, like the writing's been on the wall when you look at the volume of population growth in that sort of the western suburbs, the Sunshines, the Carolines, like that sort of stretch down there. I mean, the writing's been on the wall for a little while, right? But yet there's still this sort of, I don't know whether you want to call it a stigma even, against, wanting to become a country bumpkin sort of thing, right? Now, on that though, and when we think about... Yeah, exactly. When we think about what's gone on over the last year, and the flexibility in working conditions that have been enforced upon the world, mate, just from the chats that you've had, you said you're chatting to people today where their last 3 workers have been relocating from Melbourne. I mean, how serious is this chat around people that are feeling that they can move out that way now and still maintain, the work side of things in the city, but also from an employer point of view, how many employers, because I know that you do get around and speak to lots of business owners and whatnot fairly regularly, how many of them are starting to think, you know what, our talent pool's just gone like that? It's just gone bananas because of the volume of good talent that we can either plug into remotely or that we can probably convince to get down here.
Mate, I reckon that's a fantastic point, and I hadn't really thought about it in that context where, people have been working from home for the past, 6 to 8 months. So you're 100% right. And I think what you're saying now, I'll be talking about that tomorrow to other people that I know, because I know a lot of people in recruitment, and I know a lot of people in real estate, but also in other areas where you don't have to actually be physically present to be able to, to facilitate your role in the best possible way. So that's an incredible point, and I think you can probably pull talent from other regional towns. You can pull talent from Melbourne. At some of the hands-on jobs, obviously you can't really do that, but from the buyers that I've spoken to, or the people that I've spoken to that are thinking about moving up this way, they can still perform their duties on a 5-day basis, even if it means going to Melbourne twice a week instead of having to be in the office 5 days. So that just gives them a little bit more work-life balance than what they had the same time last year. I can draw from personal experience. I made the decision. I actually made the decision pre-COVID. I sort of started to think about it in December, and then, in January, February, I sort of pulled the pin on Melbourne and said I'm going to move back here because I want to spend more time with my kids, and enjoy just a bit of a slower lifestyle than what I've been accustomed to over the last sort of decade. And I've still been able to perform my duties. Yes, I'm in an area where we can move around, but even still, I've had to perform a lot of them talking to people in Melbourne via Zoom, number one, who are doing the creative for the project, the developers being stuck in Melbourne, the architects being stuck in Melbourne, still being able to have exactly the same meetings. They've been a hell of a lot more condensed. There's not that whole, driving 20 minutes to get to a meeting, sitting in the meeting room for 20 minutes having a chat about the weekend, and then finally getting onto it and then spending an hour talking about, when are we going to have the next meeting? It's been really, let's get the job done, work out what we need to do, because the intermittent internet that we've got, there's always someone dropping out. So let's just nip it in the bud now before we get cut off. So that, from that perspective, I think people are going to start working more efficiently. They're going to be a hell of a lot smarter. And yes, bringing talent from other parts of Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, regional parts. There's probably some amazing brains in, regional Australia somewhere that are not getting the employment that they probably deserve, that probably have the opportunity to do so now.
I think when you think about, the next generation coming through in those regional towns, there's because of obviously ease of access to, the internet and information and all that sort of stuff. There's a hell of a lot more of those younger, the younger potential there that, are way more inclined to be white collar as opposed to blue. They're way more inclined to be using this over these, right? And that's where I reckon the likes of Geelong could really sort of plug into the regional areas around it and just go bananas in terms of the abilities that they can perhaps tap into. I think it's it's an exciting time, and I mean, I've said this point once or twice when it comes to stay-at-home mums as well. Stay-at-home mums that all of a sudden have got this access to work and access to teams and employment opportunities. And so, I mean, Jesus, some talent in them working mums, like from a business point of view, right?
100%.
So
yep.
It's going to be a fascinating little time, and I think that's something that Geelong could really get a grip of, because everybody in regional towns around there sees Geelong as the big city, right? And Melbourne is this like monstrosity type thing.
Yeah.
So I think there's a real good opportunity there. Now, from a real estate point of view, is there a hell of a lot of commuting? And please excuse my ignorance. Is there a hell of a lot of commuting from those regional towns to Geelong? So, like, there's that sort of a shrunk down version of the Monash, basically. People going into, or is Geelong fairly self-sufficient in terms of employees and inhabitants, sort of thing?
No, Geelong's extremely self-sufficient from that perspective, but there are multiple avenues of areas where people draw in from, and it's not so much super regional, but people from Torquay come into Geelong, people from Barwon come to Geelong, Anglesey, even Lorne, but then you've got Colac as well, which is a hub in itself, and then you've got your Bannockburns and all these other little areas just outside of Geelong, which people come in to work in town. So it sort of feeds off a number of different, areas across regional Geelong, if you want to call it that.
Are they all seeing the same amount of attention as Geelong itself?
No, not as much. Geelong's really getting a big focus at the moment because it has got a CBD, it's got a nucleus, it's got a heartbeat, like we said before, where there's great opportunities to work. I think that's the big thing. People want to make sure that they've got secure employment, but they've also got the capacity to be able to move around, enjoy, have fun. There's some great little precincts, like Little Mallet Street in Geelong. There's about, 15 or 20 different eateries, bars, wine bars, cocktail bars, restaurants that you can go and eat and enjoy. You can, you find people along the weekend sort of hopping up and down between 3, 4 and 5 of them as the night progresses, and then crawling from the wee hours of the morning.
Mate, tell us a bit more. What's this project that you're cracking on with at the minute then?
Yeah, so it's very exciting. So it makes part of, so I'm selling stage 2, which is called Ryrie Home, but it makes part of the parent brand is Geelong Quarter, which is 180 room Holiday Inn hotel, which is going in with 16 sort of super luxury residences up top. And when I say super luxury for Geelong, they've got Wolf and Sub-Zero in the kitchens.
Right.
So they're not sparing any expense at all. They're amazing. They're all really large. They're all well over 110 to 250 square metres in terms of internal space, with some incredible outdoor spaces. So those particular residences have access to the hotel facilities, so they get concierge services, so they can get food taken up. They've got swimming pools. They've got the whole works. So it's a really exciting precinct for Geelong. Downstairs, there's going to be restaurants and cafes, which will be accessible to the general public, plus all the residences. And then next door is the project we're marketing now, which is called Ryrie Home, and that's 1, 2, and 3 beds. There's 109 apartments in total. Some more retail down the bottom, and that's going to be another great project. It's very distinct to the other building as well, so it doesn't look like we've just whacked 2 buildings that look exactly the same up there. They're quite distinct in their approach and aesthetically, understanding of where they are in the area as well. It's in the zone of Geelong, which they dubbed the Arts Precinct, which is across the road from the Geelong Performing Arts Centre. There's the beautiful, if you haven't seen it, Google the Geelong Library. It's an incredible design in itself. I think Geelong's been dubbed as a UNESCO City of Design as well, which is an amazing sort of, hat tip to to what Geelong's got to offer from a creative point of view. And then from there on, you've got Johnson Park, and then you've got the waterfront. So, and then Deakin University. So from that perspective, that whole precinct there is actually a really, really interesting place to be. The apartments themselves they're really well internally designed. 2.85 metre exposed concrete soffit ceilings. So they're that sort of New York feel inside. Again, which is very different to what Geelong's seen, but from the inquiries that we've had and the sales that we've made thus far, people have really taken it on board and saying this is amazing. We haven't seen anything like this before, which is good. And then you're a stone's throw away from everything else. You've got the train station within 750 metres. The big old GPO, so the big post office on the corner, was just bought by a very well-known local, Bill, and he's turning it into he's going to turn it into a 40-room boutique hotel plus a rooftop bar, very similar to. I think he's taken the inspiration from QT in Melbourne, to be honest. So that's going to set a very, very new trend for the area. So with Rory Home, Geelong Quarter, that Little Mallet, the waterfront. It's a great place to be, and this is a really exciting time. Like everyone in Geelong talks about Geelong like it's the most amazing thing that's come out of COVID, because people are moving here. There's a bit more focus now. I think I've been quoted on 3 or 4 different articles over the past few weeks about why people are moving to this town now, and why it's such a great place and what's happening. And obviously now talking to the great man yourself about what's happening out this way too. So, it's a really, really exciting time, and I'm really privileged and lucky to be in the position that I am in now, from a pioneering point of view in a sense, where development's really just about to take off.
Mate, let's talk about apartment land for a brief second, because obviously you're very much ingrained in that right now. Apartments in the city, well, they've been struggling for a little while, but there seems to be quite a negative focus in terms of Melbourne CBD and Melbourne City, obviously Docklands and whatnot. But the general vibe is that apartment land really is struggling in Melbourne. But you were saying earlier on and the other day that the volume of inquiry for your new precinct is really quite amazing, really.
Yeah, it is. It's really strong. To get close to 100 leads a week on one project is wow. Huge. But to have that really good engaging conversation, and they're not your typical Melbourne CBD, South Bank or Docklands buyer. And remembering I've got years and years of experience in that particular zone of real estate in Melbourne. You'd see predominant Southeast Asian buyers, offshore, not a lot of local mum and dad investors buying into the CBD, where Geelong is the polar opposite. There's a lot of mum and dad investors. There's a lot of locals that I have the conversation that they say, we've got our home here. We're totally unencumbered. We've never invested before and we want to buy something. We've got a couple of kids. We think it's a good long-term opportunity. So, that in itself shows that Geelong has got some way to go from that perspective, and the people that are doing it now are probably going to be the beneficiaries of some good capital growth over the journey.
Nice. I mean, what sort of figures are we talking for your precinct, just roughly?
Well, we had, again, Core Logic basically give us the data, and we used the Urbis data that we had as well. I think it was, I can't remember now because I think I've had a couple of these, but I think it was sort of close to 10% per annum on average over the past 3 years. Capital growth for apartments, not homes, apartments.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I think that's a comparison to about maybe 3% in Melbourne.
Yeah.
For the same type of accommodation. So if you're looking to invest, the numbers don't lie. Number one, you've got the lowest interest rates ever seen in Australia, and you've got very, very low vacancy rates. You've got incredible capital growth, and good rental yields as well, plus everything else. There's $400 or $500 million of infrastructure going into Geelong at the moment. So, the fast rail, You'll be able to catch a train to Melbourne in 30 minutes. And the Spirit of Tasmania as well. That'll be here in a few years. So, there's more and more reasons why. And it goes back to Geelong's history. They used to call it Pivot City. And it was called Pivot City because this was the point where people would then branch off to other areas. So it's coming back to the original roots.
What sort of price points are we talking for apartment land down there?
For Ryrie that we're selling, there's a one better for $375. A little bit bigger, we've got a $375 with a car, which turns into $420,000. And then we've got 2 bedrooms from sort of that high 6 range, but they're all sort of 70 to 80 square metres, so they're quite big for the price you're paying. And then we've got a really good price pointed 3 bedroom at $855, and then we've got a few different price points all the way up to about 1.7. So there's lots and lots of different opportunities in there, but it's a really, really good project. We've had great uptake already, which has been good.
And at the top end, are you getting nibbles at the top end down there, like in that sort of mid ones and above?
Oh yeah. There was actually an apartment that sold on the waterfront just a few months ago for about 2.9 million. So there's definitely the depth of buyers. Stage one was an average of about 1.8, 1.9, and there's only 2 left.
Right.
So there's definitely a depth of buyers, and again, it's something that Melburnians, people from Sydney, they don't really understand that. There's quite a lot of affluence in the Geelong region. Whether it was from old dairy times or whatever the case may be. There's quite a fair bit of money around here that want to reinvest in the area because they love it, they know it, and they believe in it.
And let's be honest. When you look at the varying buyer demographics and whatnot, and the volume of locals that are buying into Melbourne, into the city, it's just not even a comparison, right? It's just not a comparison. But you've still got local money funding a lot of local initiatives, which is what. I know it's what a lot of Australians cry out for. It's what they want. It's what they still want to see. But then Geelong still doesn't pop up in the conversation because you're right. People just don't realise how much it's driven by local people. Yeah,
and I think that's a good thing, and it's probably, I do know a lot of people that have apartments in Melbourne. And if I think back to the length of time that they've had them, it's probably like over 30 or 40 years, which probably means that, it's a very similar story to here, where people were looking at apartments as they started to come into Melbourne, and they thought this is a good opportunity. And now they've got these amazing apartments in, Flinders Lane and the top end, the Paris end of town, up towards Spring Street, and the likes, where they've really capitalised on incredible growth as Melbourne's grown. And I think these are the people that we're going to be talking about, or maybe there's going to be someone else in my position in 20 years' time saying the same thing about Geelong. The people that bought in because now everyone else in the world has sort of seen Geelong as a really important, and pivotal place in Victoria or in Australia. So, I think that's probably where we're at the moment. It's an exciting period to be in for sure.
Mate, what do you see? We've talked about sort of more longer term stuff. What do you see in the short term? What sort of what's your feel? Like I said, you've been in the game for almost 18 years, been at the top of fairly significant firms as well. So you've got a good grip on a lot of things. Tell me, over the course of, just say the next 6 to 12, what's your tip? I know it's about as unpredictable as it'll ever get, but what's your tip? What's your feeling, your gut feel on the landscape, both in resi and commercial, over the next 6 to 12?
Look, I think if you look back over, and again, it's the last 12 months and no example of the last 20 years because we're in that 1 in 100 year event. But if you look back over the course of the last 40 years in real estate, there's been depressions, there's been GFCs, there's been recessions. Amidst that situation, it's always bounced back bigger and better than ever. So I think now is the time to do it. I think any time in real estate, it will probably say the same thing. And it's probably a silly thing for me to say, but it's so obvious that now's the time to buy. It doesn't matter whether it's a good market, bad market, or otherwise. Now's the time to buy because tomorrow's always going to be better. I've always looked at real estate in Australia, as a big piece of toast. Where people sort of flock to the crust, or to the coast. We're basically on the coast, so buying property in the high demand areas are always going to do well. We're not densely populated right throughout the whole of Australia, so there's always going to be a supply and demand issue. There's always going to be a reason to buy. There's always going to be a deficit from the population growth to construction. So, I think from my perspective, looking at Geelong, commercial aspect, and I viewed quite a lot of commercial opportunities today, actually, and I found, something under $1 million in the heart of Geelong CBD. That's totally unheard of. I mean, comparing that to a Melbourne-based, triple-story, beautiful old building, you're spending anywhere between 5 and 10 million for something like that. So, to buy that under $1 million, I'd be looking at commercial properties in Geelong. But on the same token, with 10% increase in capital growth, I'd be looking at apartments in the CBD, and then looking at some good opportunities for some older period homes to renovate and rent out and keep for the future.
Well, if you've got capital, then there's a real opportunity. The opportunity, right? I think you're absolutely spot on. It is now. 2021. You think how far into 2021 do you think momentum's going to be? Going to keep going?
To what the banks have been saying, there's a lot of hiatus on mortgage repayments over the next few months up until that March period. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens after that. Whether there's a few defaults on mortgages, and whether things are having to sort of be put on the market because of force as opposed to need and necessity. We'll have to see how that comes. I think that's going to be the real barometer for where we're at, and hopefully there's no third wave and fourth wave and that sort of thing. Hopefully we've eradicated this COVID-19 for good, or at least managed it, because then we'll really see the outlay of what the property market's going to be. But I think for everyone, just be positive and see the opportunities for what they're worth. And I think post March we're really going to get a good barometer on where things are at.
It's definitely.
That's just my thoughts. Who am I?
Oh, mate, I think you sent it. I think March is going to be the really critical one, right? That's going to be the real sort of turning point, one way or another. I think that chatting to a few people offline, I think that it could well end up being a steady flow of stock and not the glut of stock that we've seen that we were initially thinking, partly because of that extension of that JobKeeper. So I think that supply and demand is actually going to stay pretty reasonable. I'd have thought. It's whether people can heed the warnings, right? It's whether people can heed the warnings and batten down the hatches so that when their JobKeeper does get taken away from them, hopefully they're not as reliant on it as what they perhaps are now. So fingers crossed, man. Mate, I've taken up plenty of your time. You're an absolute legend. You're a gentleman and a scholar, and it's bloody good to connect with you. Every time it's been great to connect with you, mate. Is there anything else that you want to mention to anyone before I let you go?
If anyone is interested in having a look and having a chat about regional Victoria and Geelong in particular, reach out. Send me a message. There's I'm all ears, and I've got a bit of information to share. So if anyone's got any questions, I'd be happy to take your call.
Look, gang, take him up on that offer. I mean, this lad is most certainly one of the guys in Geelong that you do want to know, because he does have a real passion for it. It's so obvious when he talks about it, and he's got the figures to back it all up as well. It's not just his smooth silver tongue that he's got flapping around. He's got some chops to go with it as well. He's absolutely got some chops. Mate, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thanks ever so much for coming on the show again. You're one of, I think, are you the second visitor? No, you're the second. You are the second. You're the only two people that have been on here twice. So mate, thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon.
All right, mate. Hopefully we'll get to have a proper catch up at some point soon as well. And until then, go and top up that wine glass. It's looking a bit bare.
Yes, I will.
All right then, gang. Look, thanks ever so much for joining us. You guys take care, and of course, stay safe, stay healthy. Most importantly, though, on behalf of Nick and myself, stay happy. Take care, gang.